Focus today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and there's a lot in the news as the president is certainly attracting a lot of companies to come back to America or come into America to make investments. And the latest one over the last couple of days was Apple's big deal. And mixed into all of this is the future of AI, artificial intelligence. Well, perfect timing for us to have back with us today Bill Walton. He is the Unwoke CEO. He's the host of the Bill Walton Show. He chairs the Resolute Protector Foundation, which is a 501c3 media production company that creates and produces original educational and entertainment content. 2015, he served as the chairman of the Tea Party Patriots. 16 and 17, he led the agency action and the landing teams for all of the federal economic agencies for the Donald J. Trump Presidential Transition Team. He does have a website, BillWaltonShow.com, and there's the picture of that landing page, BillWaltonShow.com. Bill, good to see you again, friend. How are you?
Oh, great. Good to be back. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for your time. Wow. Let's just jump into it. How big is this Apple deal?
Well, it's big because we've got Tim Cook, who essentially assembled all of Apple's operations in China, now pledging to invest. Well, he had earlier pledged to invest $500 billion. Now he's pledging an additional $100 billion. Just tossing in $100 billion for emphasis, investing that in the U.S. And the problem that Tim is going to have is right now only about 5% of the iPhone, for example, to pick their flagship product, parts come from the U.S. The rest of them come from, I think it's 40 or 50 different countries. There are 3,800 different parts, and there are like 15 different screws that go into it, and they're manufactured in three different countries. And so this is a big move. And I think what Tim's going to be doing is probably finding the easier things to source, like silicon wafers and the glass. I think he's got a deal cut with Corning and bring it in. But it's important. It's symbolic because it harkens back to the inaugural where you saw the 6 or 7 tech titan billionaires standing in the front row celebrating, or at least being present at Trump's inauguration. And that was a big deal because Silicon Valley and the tech community has been estranged from the Republicans and from Trump. And in the last 4 or 5 years, that's turned around, and that's a very good thing for us in America.
Bill, do you know the timeline of this investment?
It's vague. All these commitments are vague. I think it's probably over the next 3 to 4 years, perhaps. I think the timeline is probably Trump's term in office, and it'll take time. And of course, turning a ship around, the metaphor, this is not an oil tanker. This is the equivalent of 20 oil tankers put together. Trying to get this turned in the ocean is going to take a long time because there are a lot of moving parts. And I think there are parts of the Apple iPhone that could probably never be created or manufactured here in the U.S.
What does this mean to China?
Well, China's interesting in their reaction to this. They're not overreacting to Trump's trade wars. I think they believe they're big enough and they've got enough sales around the world to offset what Trump may do to them with tariffs. Their exports rose this quarter. So they're not seeing any decline. Now, some of that's in anticipation of what Trump might do, but they're turning inward. I mean, they just announced that, I don't know if they announced it, but they started a policy where all the civil servants in China have been asked to turn in their passports, and they don't want anybody traveling abroad. And about 3 months ago, they codified something they've been doing all along, but they made it legal to steal intellectual property from companies doing business here or doing business there in China. And the law is broad. It goes all the way down to being able to confiscate cash from companies that are doing business there. So, and the net investment in China, or the gross investment in China from outside foreign direct investments, practically dropped to zero. So they're turning inward at the same time we're trying to separate ourselves. And so in a way, I think it's unfortunate because I think we're much less likely to get into a hot fight with the hot war with China if we are interconnected in some ways. And I don't care if they make kids toys. I just don't want them making our aspirin or our pharmaceutical, a lot of our key pharmaceuticals. So I think nuance is the order of the day, and I'm not sure that's exactly the way we're going at this.
Okay, there's a lot here. So as Apple makes this announcement to put a $100 billion investment back into the United States, that's a lot of money. A lot of that does rely on, as you said earlier, Bill, to the supply chain to make those products coming from various countries. But the other thing is labor, the labor costs. What will this do by coming back to the United States and paying these labor rates?
Well, the trade in China now does not depend on lower labor cost. In fact, China is, remember their one-child policy, and they're suffering a demographic bust, and they've got an aging population, and so it's not necessarily cheap labor that would make you want to do manufacture in China. But interestingly, ironically, or coincidentally, or whatever word you want to use, when Apple went to China aggressively in 2001 or 2002, they didn't go over there and say, well, can you send us some stuff and we'll buy it from you. They went over and basically created the manufacturing requirements that they had to put together the iPhone and the other Apple products. And in doing so, they taught the Chinese some very sophisticated manufacturing techniques. And of course, the Chinese being the Chinese, they copied that down to the last detail and have replicated that manufacturing expertise elsewhere in China with other products. And so it's interesting where we find ourselves, where we've taught them to do the things that we no longer know how to do because we are no longer manufacturing. In some ways, we've lost some of that expertise here in the country. So I don't think it's going to be cost so much the labor, but it will be trying to assemble the parts and there's some estimates that an iPhone assembled here in the U.S. using only U.S. expertise would cost $3,500. So was it 3 times what they're charging right now? So it's what everything that Trump, a lot of what Trump is doing, of course, is it's going to increase cost of a lot of stuff here in the U.S. And the claim is that this is not going to going to create inflation. I remain skeptical because if we slap tariffs of 15%, 25%, 50% on stuff that the U.S. buys, I think it's got to work its way into our prices.
Okay, a couple things here still.
It's complicated.
No, it is, but we need to see this because I think as he continues to push the tariff issue, and he's using it obviously as a negotiating tool. Do you think he's counting on increased employment to offset anything that would be representative of inflation?
Well, he's certainly counting on the idea that the man, I can't remember, his name escapes me, the head of his Council of Economic Advisors, who he just named to the Fed.
Oh, Marin.
Yeah, is a believer that this is going to be, what he's doing is all going to be deflationary and that prices will come down. And he may be right. I mean, if we look at the impact of artificial intelligence, and yes, I think AI is going to create some job loss, but it's also going to bring prices down. So we may not see more jobs, but we may see lower prices as a consequence of AI.
Does AI possibly offset the intellectual property issue that companies like Apple will lose when they move back to the United States?
In what sense? I mean,
if part of doing business in China was relinquishing intellectual property, everything in the future hinges on new technology, which AI will be contributing to. So I'm trying to figure out, as they move back, how much of a loss is it for them to lose the intellectual property that they leave in China?
Well, I think the Chinese have caught up in most regards. If you look at what happened with DeepSeek, they're now showing some real innovation in the AI field, and one of the unintended consequences of us stopping sophisticated chips going to China is that they've begun to step up their expertise to build their own, and that's why the Trump administration, David Sachs, or AI and Cyberzar, they put together a very interesting plan where they believe that we ought to be, instead of restricting exports, we ought to be increasing exports of our technology to have the world become dependent on our software, our hardware to develop their artificial intelligence. So in effect, we become the leader because we're the technology leader here in the States. I think it's a clever strategy. I like it. And the Chinese have shown ability to build some of this on their own. They're no longer just copying. I think they've got some innovators there. And I think the bigger risk is we force them to innovate beyond what we're doing. And I think we'd be better off co-opting them.
I'm just curious, did what we're talking about today, was any of this part of your discussion during the transition team during his first term?
In 2016. No, this is a brave new world, and the thing I like about Trump 2.0 as opposed to Trump 1.0 is that he came fully ready to play in a lot of arenas, and I mentioned that I think the tech community has now joined Trump world, and we've got some fairly sophisticated people who are part of the Trump team, and I don't think there's a government that would be able to deal with the AI issue as effectively as the people that Trump's got working on this. And before you had kind of the technology community on the West Coast and government here, and never the twain shall meet. And now now that's different. So, but it is new. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not something that was in, certainly that wasn't what I was working on back in 2016.
Yeah, it's just I was curious on that. So at the end of the day, as more and more major corporations are coming back to America via using tariffs one way or the other,
Yeah.
ultimately, is China in trouble?
Well, China's in trouble right now. China's in trouble because of the demographic bust that they're going to experience. We think about China as billions and billions and growing. Well, they're not growing. The population's likely to start shrinking in about 15 or 20 years. They had they overinvested in real estate. They built towns that didn't have they didn't have people lined up to live in them. So they've got a tremendous overbuilding in both residential and industrial building, and the real estate market's been in a depression for about 3 years now. They've alienated a lot of the rest of the countries around them. I mean, it's really interesting that China has a water problem. They don't have enough, and what they do have is extremely polluted, and they're now threatening to build a, I don't know, $50 billion dam that would cut off water to the Cambodia, Vietnam, and all the countries that are south of them. And they're not a popular kid on the block, and they've done some things that they try to ingratiate themselves into all the NGOs, the World Health Organization, et cetera, and people are beginning to react negatively to that. So I think they've got themselves isolated, and I think in a way President Xi has brought this on himself because he's a hardcore Marxist, and he wants to play by that book.
All right, let me take a quick break. Honored to have back with us Bill Walton. Check out his website, thebillwaltonshow.com, where you can also check into that. There's a picture of the landing page. We'll take a quick break. We'll come right back. Okay, welcome back. Honored to have back with us Bill Walton. He's actually known as the Unwoke CEO. He's also the host of the Bill Walton Show, and you can check out all the things that he's involved in at thebillwaltonshow.com. And there's the picture of his landing page. And he's a pretty experienced guy, and even worked on the transition team during President Trump's first term. Bill, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier because it rang a bell in me, because I too have been really concerned about this, and that is China's basically control of our pharmaceutical development. Yeah. And this is a big deal, especially coming out of COVID. And I'm wondering, do you think the president in time will create some kind of an incentive for that industry to come back to town?
Oh, I'm sure they will. They have to. I mean, right now they've got their focus on vaccines and all the issues that Robert Kennedy's focused on, but. That to me would be number one. I mean, they're close. So our pharmaceuticals and also silicon, with technology. Those two things are neck and neck. And we found out last time during the lockdown that we couldn't even manufacture aspirin in this country. I mean, maybe a contract manufacturer somewhere, but not in scale. And our antibiotics would be another one that we buy from elsewhere. That needs to be a presidential priority, and he hadn't been talking about it much. But I hope that's the next up.
Can we trust it? Can we trust what they're getting? I mean, I realize it's got to go through the FDA
No.
and all that, but can we really trust what they're doing?
Well, and it's worse. It's not. They won't let us inspect what they're doing in their country. They had some sort of faux way that their FDA could go in and check manufacturing of this stuff, but they wouldn't let them into the plants. I mean, there are all sorts of things they're doing that make it a mystery. And I wonder, I'm at that age where I need to take a lot of pills, and I just wonder, because they could do anything with that, and I think we need to be really clear. I know the FDA inspects pharmaceuticals that come in, and I know we've got processes in place, but I think we're really vulnerable, and we ought to focus on it.
Why haven't we made a bigger deal out of China being the primary producer of fentanyl?
Well, I know that's on the table in the trade organization, in the trade negotiations. The thing I like about what Trump is doing with the tariffs is he's using tariffs to accomplish other things. But and fentanyl is on the table when they're talking about the trade arrangements with China. But I don't even there. I don't think we've done enough. I know it's also on the table with Canada, but Canada doesn't make it. Canada just the mob in Canada just brings it in, and it's manufactured elsewhere. And the key component is directly from China, and I believe that's on purpose. The Chinese had something called a century of humiliation, where the British and the U.S. Forced them into the opium addiction and the opium wars in the 1840s and 1850s, and it really wrecked the Chinese culture. And they deteriorated. They lost their emperor. They went through turmoil. They became, as we know, communist in 1949. And Xi uses that, and the leadership uses that century of humiliation. And I think it would be very much in their playbook to use fentanyl as payback for what we did with opium to them.
Interesting. I want to come back to AI, big thing, a big deal. And as you know, and you've said that the president wants America to be the leader in AI innovation.
Yeah.
Is that also a means of national security?
Absolutely. It's that all. I mean, everything in the battlefield will be controlled by AI if it isn't already. And the human element will be, in human judgment, in fact, will be a lot less evident, and we deploy things tactically. And AI in terms across all industries, across all of society, because the Chinese are in a war that is, I can't remember the name for it, three warfares, warfares, or so on and so forth. And they believe in legal, cultural, warfare, and so AI is going to be integral to that. I'm a major critic of our green agenda, the big New Deal, and I think the Chinese have been behind pushing the Green New Deal with their money and their lobbying. And of course, we buy everything from China, solar panels and all the elements that go into wind. And at the same time, we're impoverishing ourselves. Look what Germany's done with green energy. Their economy is shrinking. So I think the Chinese are using information warfare as we speak, and AI is light years more sophisticated than what we saw even 5 years ago. So yeah, it's the battlefield.
We're in this time where AI is coming on the scene. We see the good and the bad of it. Depending how people use AI, there is some measure by which they can determine whether or not it's giving you the truth or not. We've seen it in broadcasting. But if you look ahead a couple of generations down the road, no matter what AI does could be received as absolute truth if we don't keep the yellow light flashing.
Oh, that's a concern. That's a concern. I'd say the red light should be flashing. And we need, already on the internet, you can't really believe what you're reading or seeing. And, one would hope that some entrepreneurs would come up with a way to detect whether what we're seeing is AI or quote real. And I think that's a challenge for society, is to understand how much of the information we're getting and is AI and how much of it's real. There was some video on YouTube that was making the rounds that showed some bunnies jumping on a trampoline, and of course the kids think they've figured out what's real and what isn't real, and they were complaining that even they couldn't figure out that this had been generated by AI, and just something as entertaining as that. And of course, Hollywood and the TV industry, computer games, all that, in the production side of that, a lot of it's being, the code for computer games is now being written by AI, and AI is writing code for itself. So
is it possible, Bill, that AI will make us lazy and dumb?
yeah. It will. I think the odds are pretty high that we could be reduced to, we have to beware of that. But yeah, I think it's a high possibility because it's such a crutch. I mean, I carry, I just as a, I'm kind of a power user of AI on this little device, and I can look up a recipe for pizza, or I can talk about what's this algorithm mean, or what is gold doing relative to the to the Chinese yuan, all that sort of thing. It's all in here, and a lot of the research we would have done, the brain power we would have used to figure that stuff out on our own, we don't have to. We could just ask it. I think it's a big risk.
Well, yeah, because to that point, we could be graduating people from universities. They haven't got the foggiest idea what they just got a degree in because AI got it for them.
Well, I think we're already doing that. Have you employed? I mean, I used to employ a lot of recent college grads, and that's been a problem even before AI came along.
Wow. You're fascinating. Let's stay in touch. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check out Bill's show. It's called thebillwaltonshow.com, and that's also his website. And you can go there and check it out. Pretty fascinating. Bill, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. God bless you, friend. Stay in the fight.
Okay, great. Thanks.
See you. Bye.